Clean version.
Subscribe to YouTube if you haven't.
Yeah, his YouTube channel is Intrasubjectively and Stands Independently, the best YouTube channel. I'm very much talking from the heart here.
I mean it from the heart. Yeah, I'm talking from the heart.
Yeah, what's up? You got evidence that a God exists?
I was actually curious about like talking about the self, not God. I know you talk about a lot of different topics, but I'm curious, like, what do you think the self is? What I mean by that, like, a prerequisite for subjective experience is the subject. So when you put your hand on the stove, there's a subjective experience of heat, and there's also an observer of that subjective experience. There's a subject. So a prerequisite for any subjective experience is a subject. I'm curious, what do you think the subject is, and what distinguishes different subjects? Like, what's the difference between like subject 77 and like subject like 130? Like, say you're like observer or subject 2 and observer like 70. Like, where do you get different ones from?
The birds and the bees, man.
Okay, well, I mean, there's one question you're asking is like philosophy of mind, and then the other one's philosophy of identity. I'm a physicalist, a non-reductive physicalist, or type B physicalist. I believe that the mind or consciousness or conscious experience is explained by physical states, but it doesn't reduce to the physical.
Are you going to say supervenes?
Supervenes, that's correct.
So
I didn't say it. You called it out.
Why am I not experiencing reality through your brain or like through your subjective experience? Like, why do you have like a particular located brain? Like, what about a particular brain? Like a configuration of physical matter necessitates that will bring rise to observer 77 rather than observer 2,600,012. Like, where do you get the different ones from?
I'm not entirely understanding your question.
Why are you in that brain? Like, why does that?
Because that brain is a different pattern undergoing a different process.
But you're pushing the question back. What about that particular configuration of matter necessitates that will bring rise to that particular observer? You just
we're not saying that there's a necessity there. The point is that we believe that. Well, the fact that it's local.
Okay, so let's focus on your brain. Like, you're sitting. I don't know what country you're in, what city you're in, but there's a particular location of those like atoms, those collection of particles, right? Why do these? Let's say you are observer 77 and I'm observer like 12. That's who we are. Why does that particular configuration of particles bring rise to observer 77 rather than observer 12? Why you rather than me? Like, is there an explanation for that?
Well, the identity part of that, I would probably take a view about like psychological continuity. So it's your psychological makeup and then your experiences that demarcates identities. But as for the question about
it's just a weird question.
Yeah, why do you even think like it's
no? I mean, like we're saying.
Why you even assume that?
Wait, we're saying like, observer 77 or whatever. Observer 77 has a spatiotemporal location, right? And at that same location is a particular pattern of particles undergoing a particular process, right? And it's not undergoing that process in some other spatiotemporal location. So why would you expect for consciousness to emerge in a place where it isn't?
Well, are you reducing the observer to that collection of patterns? And what?
No, I'm not reducing it to that.
Yeah, it's not.
Why are you located in that brain rather than a different brain? Why? Like, how come there's like points of attention, like specific? Like we could be switched, right?
I don't. It's like almost asking like, well, why do these atoms at these locations in area bring about intentions? That's like saying, why do these atoms that form water under the location under a fire at 100 degrees Celsius, why does that bring about boiling of water? It's just such a strange question. There's just facts about the dispositions of heat underwater. Well, what makes it bad?
That's because water is the same in all places. It's H2O, but consciousness, there's different observers. It's not.
Yeah, but there's different consciousnesses too, right? There's slightly different patterns. There's slightly different processes.
Why does this brain bring rise to observer 12 rather than observer like 70? Where's the explanation?
Well, why does my circulatory system give rise to a particular blood pressure?
Well, hold on. That's like saying, why do computers take in different information? They're all just computers.
Computers have no consciousness. It's just input and output. The analogy you're giving is kind of different.
Wait. That's exactly it. The input and output is, well, minds are local, and the information they input is from their surrounding environment. And given they have different locations, they intake different information, such that they have different psychological continuities.
Well, the input would be the subjective experience, like the smell of a rose, seeing objects and stuff.
No, that's the process.
No, that's not. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. The subjective experience is brought about by their environment. The way they're capable of getting subjective experience is informed by the consciousness that supervenes on the physical configurations, right?
Yeah, but even then, if we take that explanation, it doesn't it doesn't like fully explain why it's this one rather than a different one.
I don't
I'm
understand
Understand
what
why
that's
would you
saying.
expect what's the expectation that I
like
would
okay, just
find myself, my
ask yourself.
consciousness in a different place?
Just
It's like
ask yourself.
saying I don't.
Like
There's
my
two
brain isn't in a
apples.
different place. Like that's why. It's
I mean,
It's just look. It's just as simple as this. Like when you say so, there's two things. You're either talking about the objects being the mind, or you're talking about the identities being different. Now,
yeah,
the one is obvious that if the mind supervenes on the brain, then there's just two different brains. Just like if someone asks, how are these two apples different? Well, one apple is this one, and the other is that one, right? There might
yeah.
be facts about how they're shaped, and that we could just obviously demarcate them
Apples don't
that
have
way.
identity.
In terms,
Yeah.
well, they don't have
Apples don't
personal
have
identity.
personal
They
identity.
yeah, I identify apples, right? In order to have the nominal phrase apple, what that is a sense.
What if I
that picks
identify
out
as an
objects.
apple?
Okay, I'm not
Well-
talking about. Okay.
Wait,
don't
do
care
you have a
about
then-
particular idea that you're trying to get across?
Yeah, I think the mind is non-physical. I think there are different souls. Something about the nature of the soul makes it distinct from.
So
different
then
souls.
explain this to me. How do souls get experiences?
Yeah,
What
what is
generates
it?
what
How do you
furnishes
find yourself in one
furnished-
soul
Well,
versus another?
The soul is the observer.
But yeah, how do you find yourself in one soul? How do you even demarcate between souls? How do you
Okay,
know
so
this soul is
the-
this one and that one's that one?
Okay, so the soul is the observer of subjective experience. It's not the experiences. Like there's a subjective experience and there's a subject. So the soul is the subject. And
Yeah, I'm asking you.
that's- Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you distinguish between souls?
Okay,
What
so
soul is what?
okay, so it would be like kind of similar to colors. Like blue is distinct from pink. Something about they both fall under the umbrella of colors, but they're
How are you not
different.
doing it? How are you not answering the same way I'm answering with the brain? I'm not seeing it.
Oh,
It's just
well,
different.
So, yeah, different. But first of all,
And also,
why do
I
you
don't
think it's
understand this
physical?
color thing because the color thing is qualitative. Well, why is it physical? Well, I don't know. Maybe the past 20 centuries of neuropsychology has shown that the changes in neurochemistry and neurophysiology produces like certain mental states. Like when you have pain, you
It's
always have
correlated.
C fight. No,
Correlation is
it's
not
not
the same as causation.
no shit, but it's not
Yeah.
correlated, right? Because in philosophy of mind, there's a range of causal mechanisms or theories that produce causal mechanism about how they bring it about.
So I'm assuming you're a physicalist, right? You think
I
the
said that like
observer
3
of
times.
yeah, so you think the observer of subjective experience and the subjective experience are a collection of atoms arranged in a complex
And-
configuration.
Well, no, I don't. No, that's type A physicalism, to be clear. But what I'm not understanding is you think that the souls get information from the external world, right? Their experiences is from the. How does that
Yeah.
happen? How does So explain the process about how souls get information about the external world. I could describe that physically, like most people in tentative theories like philosophy of mind and neuroscience would. But I'm interested in understanding this type of dualist view where you think the souls gather information externally. How does that process work?
So when you say information, are you referring to like subjective experience, like smell of a rose, the taste of chocolate, and so on? When you say information, are you referring to qualia?
Mhm.
Are you- okay. So the soul is just the recipient of it. It's the one that has access to the experience. It's
How's
not
that saying anything like the mind is physical and supervenes over the brain and the brain's the recipient?
Wait, you said the mind is physical? Could you repeat that statement you just said?
Yes, I said like 4 times I'm a physicalist.
Yeah, but he
Well,
doesn't say that mental
once you-
states are reducible to physical states.
Yeah, not that they're reducible.
So what are they if they aren't reducible?
Because if they're not reducible, you fall afoul of the open question, like in Virtue of Right, about them just being a collection of particles brings about, a mental state. There's nothing about particles in that configuration to bring about
Right.
mental state, right?
Where are the
point is
mental
that-
states coming from? Like, are they non-physical themselves? Like the subjective experiences?
Sorry, no, the subjective experiences are physical.
How could you say that though? How could you say like the smell of a
Because
rose
they-
is something physical? If it was physical, you would have like a spatial location. You could
No, that's not
observe it
true.
and so on.
That's not true.
So you're saying physical, but
in,
you're kind
in
of
philosophy of mind, have you read philosophy of mind? No, wait, why would you make that? Have you read philosophy?
I mean, he's
of mind
talking about
literature?
qualia, so he's probably read something.
Well, but he wants to say that physicalism is described as things being positioned in space. That's not
What do you
true.
mean by physical? Because you keep using it in
Do
like,
you-
not the scientific way that's being used by scientists and so on.
Yeah, so there's a range of ways you can describe it. Physical can mean either spatially extended or supervening on spatially extended things. It could mean whatever physics has the in principle ability to describe, or you can describe it as, well, Linford takes a view that he describes physical as non-mental.
Non-mental.
Which of course is not. That's of course
kind of
not.
ambiguous. Yeah. Yeah. So
Well, he's just contrasting it with like a rock. We would say is non-mental.
So why do you even believe physical things exist? Because if you just look at your personal
What?
like entire existence, like all you've had
What I
is
think
like, conscious experiences. You can't. All you have is your subjective experience.
that's like saying, why would you think any object that you have observed is green? Well, I have the observation of objects instantiating the predicate.
But green is the subjective mental experience. All you have is access to like mental experiences.
What
Like,
did-
you
what does
can't
that
even prove
change you?
physical things exist.
Wait, you're not understanding. You're just saying it's a perception that you perceive the green. That's all you're saying. What is that doing? I believe things because I perceive them.
Yeah,
Right? That's just
I
such a
mean,
strange
even
The
in
question.
fact that I can't transfer my consciousness to another body is an argument
It's
against
like
idealism.
asking
It's just-
why
how's that an
believe you have a
argument?
mother. That's like saying why believe you have a mother. Like you have perceptions of you having a mother.
I mean, if you think of a dream, right? So you probably had many dreams. You're having like subjective experiences.
You've been
but
listening to
doesn't mean
Bernardo
they're actually-
Kastrup, haven't you?
You can't
Probably.
You might think.
Oh,
like,
actually,
something in
you're
dreams
right.
physical.
He probably has been, unironically. But in any case, no. Dreams are not perceptions. Right? If you ask
Well,
anyone,
they're conscious experiences. It's the observer having conscious experiences.
they're not perceptions though. They're not perceptions.
They're conscious experiences, but if someone in a dream could say,
Yeah,
like,
but they're
this
internally
object exists
generated.
physically, but it's just a conscious experience. Like if they could think straight in a dream, they would say this object exists independent of the subjective experience I'm having right now. But in reality, it's just subjective experiences. And
Oh no, I
subject-
was wrong. No, I was wrong. Actually, I was thinking about material. That Linford defines material as non. Because I don't know. I'm pretty sure Linford's a physicist. I meant to say he defines material as non-mental. But you're just wrong about this because nothing. Even if I were an idealist, there's still facts about things having the predicate of being physical. Whether everything, if I was like a Berkeleyan subjective idealist, things still instantiate the predicate of being of being physical. Because physical is not material, and material is what is typically defined as contrasted with mental. Where if you're an idealist, you can't be a materialist, right? If you're a subjective idealist, you don't believe there's material objects. But that doesn't mean there's non-physical things, right? Or else there wouldn't be a physics in your subjective experience.
Well, it could be like multiple minds and like one absolute mind. So the bedrock of reality would be like a mind or a conscious.
What is an absolute mind? What does that even mean?
Like a mind that has no form, like formless.
What?
Form is like limitation.
Wait, why would we expect something without form to be a mind?
What would it mean for something to exist formless? What does that even mean? The
Well,
word
if you-
exist
if you
as
look at
I
any
use.
If you look at any object like around you, it has a particular like
Description.
description, a particular shape. Like
Uh-huh.
this ruler
Yeah.
is not
So
long.
everything that exists has a particular description.
Yeah,
And now
it
you're
has
saying
a
something
particular
exists
form.
that has no description?
No, if something has no form, it has no
No
like,
existence.
well, it could exist just as like a mind or just
No,
your
what?
consciousness.
Like I don't
Okay.
I don't understand what it would mean for something to exist formless. I don't. That sounds like something
It would just be the
platonic.
absence of
I-
limitation.
I-
The form is limitation.
I don't know what you mean by limitation there. But I
Well,
don't. Still, that doesn't inform me what you mean by exist, where something can exist formless. What would
Well,
that mean?
if anything has form, it's limited by definition because it's being limited by
So
its particular
wait,
form.
if it's true by definition, is all you mean by limit a form?
Well, that's what form is. It's like form is limitation because if something
No,
has
no.
a
I'm
particular
asking you.
form,
I'm asking
it's
you.
limited by that form.
Hold on.
Wait,
Hold on.
isn't-
Hold on. I'm asking you if that's a synonym, though.
Yeah, it's referring to basically the same
Okay.
thing.
Isn't limitless a description?
Yeah, but he's not. He's saying a tautology. He's just saying that God is form, or there's a formless mind which is limitless, which just means it's formless. Okay, I'm asking you what it means for something to exist limitless or formless. What does that mean?
It just is. It's okay.
It just
What-
is.
It
No,
is
like
some
what is
way.
even that question?
There's no just
What do you mean
is.
by what does it mean?
Well, look,
I'm not saying it
the
just is, I'm
concept,
just-
the concept of look. I have this view that I acquire concepts phenomenologically, which means I get furnished with concepts with my experiences. My experiences reduced to sensory faculties, such that I can only perceive physical things. Such that if something's non-physical, I think it's a meaningless concept. I don't have experiences trivially of things being non or formless.
Well, in
Right? Such
dreams,
that I don't. Or
how
sorry,
do
I don't
you
have.
explain, like,
I don't have
out-of-body
a concept. Hold on. I don't have a concept of something not existing where something can be formless because the concept I have of existing just means it's physical, right? Or rather, it's a physical entity that is in the actual world. That's what I mean by exist, right? But I don't know what because you have a concept of exist where something can be formless, right, in the actual world, and I don't know what that means.
it's just the absence of limitation. It's basically the
That's a
bedrock of
synonym.
reality.
Look, imagine I said gloosh. What do you mean by gloosh? Glosh. Okay, what is glosh? Gloosh. You think you know what I mean? No.
Okay,
How
I'm
is
curious-
limitless not a form?
I'm curious, what do you think out of body experiences where like in dreams or like on like drugs like psychedelics and
It has
stuff.
nothing to
How
do.
come? How come?
Don't matter.
You said physical reality. I know things are they're
Yeah,
actually
taking drugs
independent of my
changes your
experience.
brain, and your mind supervenes on your brain.
Well, you're just
The
assuming
changes in the brain
but
are going to result in changes in your mental
Well,
states.
I don't know how you keep saying we're assuming anything, because it's not true. We're making an assumption if we have reason in our background that informs our belief, right? It's not just a decision in what I believe that's not informed
How
by
can you have
epistemic
experiences
reasons.
like in a dream where
But look,
it's not physical, purely
But
not
look, let's
physical?
how about I think the best way we do this is we go back to how does the soul gather information? How does souls have quality experience?
Well, the information, the subjective experience, like the smell of a rose, the pain of a toothache, and so on, they exist independently of the observer of those experiences, and what the observer
What does that mean? Experiences exist?
independently.
What does that mean? I understand experiences to be things that don't exist.
Like conscious
Definitionally.
experiences? How would
You
you
can
say that?
have experiences. Experiences don't exist.
Okay, they don't exist in the concrete sense, but they exist as concepts until the observer has access to them.
No, I'm
That's
saying
all
they
that
don't
matters.
exist in any sense. They don't exist.
What do you mean? So when you put your hand on a stove, that experience doesn't exist? Or what do you mean experiences?
No,
don't
it doesn't exist. I mean, they don't exist.
He has
They don't
that
exist.
experience.
Yeah,
Well,
there's a
it's
difference to say
happening.
X. It's different to say X has property Y and property Y exists. Those are different. Like obviously, I wouldn't say hairiness exists. It's not an object because in traditional metaphysics, to say X exists means X is an object, and predicates like hairy's not an object. Hairy is a feature of objects. So to say that experiences exist, no, an object can instantiate the predicate of having an experience, right,
Okay,
or
so
have an
when-
object of experience. But experiences don't exist; they're not objects.
When you
What
put your hand on
exists
a
is the
stove,
object.
there's an experience. Does that exist in absolutely any way, shape, like in any
No,
form?
it doesn't
On
exist.
any level of reality?
I don't know. There's no such thing as levels. I don't know what that means.
Okay.
But I don't know why.
How
But
are you
look, it's
denying
kind
it?
of. I don't know.
That's
Wait,
something
hold
that
on.
exists.
I don't know why you. Hold on. I don't know why people do this. Like they like say this gibberish to kind of gerrymander what you're saying into biting
Just
the
in an
bullet. That
abstract way.
they do exist, but I made it clear. I believe several times. It's like you're doing a little tactic to have me say that they do exist. But I don't understand why people would think that that works. Like, no, I said they don't exist, and then you're saying, oh, but do you think there's modes or levels of existence? No, I don't. They don't exist. I've already
How
said
are you
that.
having it if it doesn't exist? Like when you put your hand on a stove, how's there something of
Well,
a
the
quality?
same way no one believes colors exist.
Well, they do
qualia
exist. I reject that. They're dumb if they think they don't exist. You can verify for yourself.
Well, most philosophers think that they don't exist. They're projectivists.
colors
about
Just
colors.
look at Dan
Oh.
Dennett made his life about rejecting qualia.
Look, again, what
Yeah,
it means for something to exist is that it's an object. Things can have predicates without existing, right?
Why should we accept that only objects exist? Why?
That's
why
just what is accept that. That's just true by definition. An object
how
is something
is
that
true
exists.
by definition? Why can't it include
An object
colors
is
and-
something that exists.
And anything that is not an object doesn't exist, like the feeling of
Yes.
pain.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So it's nothing. It's not part of existence. The feeling of putting your hand on a stove. It's literally
No, there's
nothing.
there's a difference between saying a predicate is instantiated and saying that the predicate exists. Platonists are the people who say predicates exist, right? People who believe there's a world of forms and that abstract objects exist, that there's abstract
There's
objects where the
redness out
objects,
in the world.
yeah, there's a robust sense of object there, right? Where the
Well, how
object
come
is an
abstract
object
realm?
object.
Obviously, abstract things exist.
Most people are not.
What do you mean?
or at
Obviously,
least,
abstract objects exist. It's not at all
The
obvious.
concept.
I mean, my God.
The concepts exist, even if
like
there was
half
nothing
of
for it.
philosophers are deny that view. In fact,
Maybe,
a lot
it
of
sounds
them
like maybe
think
you
it's
just have a different
unintelligible.
understanding. Maybe it's a semantic dispute about what exists means.
Okay,
But
no,
Monkeyboy is just,
I mean-
he's declaring what exists means in his semantics. And you're like trying to get him to accept some other definition. To like, you're saying, well, to exist means that an object does have a predicate. And the predicate exists. That's what I mean. If an object has a predicate, that predicate exists. And he's just saying, no, that's not how he understands it.
Well, that wouldn't make any sense anyways, because the predicate is not an object that has a predicate. Right? Maybe predicates reduced to further predicates, but that's again saying they're an object, which then it just calls into question what an object means there. But look, I'm going to be honest. No offense, you just don't. Though you use like concepts of mind, you just seem broadly philosophically illiterate, and it seems really difficult, like explaining what the standard construal of an object is by most of metaphysicians.
Okay, I'll
lights.
phrase it perfectly in like one sentence.
Wait,
I'll
real
just
quick.
phrase it.
Before you go, you might want to read a paper called Coining Qualia.
Sure.
It's a seminal paper. It's not the last word on it, but it's a good intro to the idea of being an eliminativist with respect to qualia.
Okay.
Oh,
So are you familiar that like Quine did this paper where he basically rejected the idea of synthetic a priori, and so they call it coining it when you coin something. So it's called coining qualia.
Sounds funny.
Okay, just to
But
get
one last thing, I just I just want to get clear again. What was your answer as to how the souls get the qualia experiences?
Okay, so experiences exist, conscious experiences like taste of chocolate, the smell of a rose, the pain of a toothache, or
Yeah, we get it. Just how do you get the experience?
independently. They exist independently, and the soul is the observer of subjective experience. It's the subject that has access to subjective experience.
How do they observe? How does the soul
Just-
observe? How does it make observations?
Well, it's the well,
How
something
do you know? How do you know the soul is observing and there's not a correlation between what the soul has the internal sensation of and facts about the external world? How do you not know it's just correlation? What's the mechanism that informs how the soul is tied to the external observations it's observing?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding, but basically, it's just the subject is the soul, and subjective experience is qualia. That's it. And
That's not informative. I'm asking what's the mechanism in which the soul gets the subjective experience?
Well, they exist independently, and I'm not sure what the exact mechanism is, like step by step. But all it's doing is receiving it.
No, it doesn't have to be. Suppose you have a very shallow understanding. What is the mechanism? The shallow understanding of the mechanism.
Okay, so the soul is something that has the ability to access subjective experience, and
The question is, how does it access it?
well, it goes back to the body, right? So there's like, I would say, like, there's binary codes, like nothing about dopamine explains.
Wait, binary codes? That sounds like a computational system, just like a physicalist
No,
can say with a
I'm not using
neural computation.
I'm using it as like a metaphor, kind of, not in a physical sense. So like,
Wait, so you don't have a literal mechanism then?
Okay, so like,
so why would you adopt a view that's metaphysically robust, right? Where it commits you to new types of substances or entities that are these woo, this spirit or soul, and
I mean, you didn't
the mechanism.
why you're in that.
And the mechanism. Hold on. Hold on.
The observers.
Well, do souls have location?
Yeah, they do. But
What explains why they're in that location?
well, we have to know what like spaces, like direction and so on. But you didn't explain
Well,
why.
we already hold on. We already appreciate direction and space. I'm asking what informs the spatial location of a soul.
Well, the soul is like attached to the body, basically. Like different souls.
What do you? Well, I don't understand.
Is the body a physical thing?
Yeah, I don't understand attached in a non-physical way. I understand attached to be the way physical entities integrate, and that's like explained maybe compositionally. What do you mean? What do you mean attached? What does that mean? If it's a non-physical construal of attach.
Well, it's basically like the non-physical having some kind of connection to the physical brain, like the observer.
Yeah, the connection. You're doing this thing again, where the connection is a synonym for attach. What do you mean by a non-physical? What is this non-physical connection? Like, describe it.
Well, think of like layers on Photoshop. You can have layer 1, layer 2, but
I can appreciate those physical
like
construals, but I don't understand this analogy because you're talking about something that have completely different natures. One that is fundamentally non-physical to one that's physical.
I mean, this is the interaction.
Could you explain why your brain brings rise to observer? Let's say you're observer 20. Why does it bring rise to observer 20 rather than observer?
But suppose the issue here is just that suppose the issue is just suppose I don't have. Hold on. The issue is suppose I don't have an answer. It doesn't seem you have any answer either at all. And in fact, it seems like given you don't have an answer, right? What we would do is suppose that we have no way of demarcating between correlation and causation under both views. And actually, most metaphysicians describe causation as strictly physical. So I don't even understand a non-physical concept of causation. But
keep using that. But
what do you mean I don't understand? I actually gave you an analysis. I actually gave you 3 accounts of what I might mean.
Physical, you're using the word physical, but it's not in the scientific way that physical is used. So you kind of
where do you wait? How are you saying? Wait, why do you say that? It's used in a non-scientific way.
A scientist, like, what does it mean for something to be physical? They would describe like that we have these building blocks of reality, like atoms. They have charge, spin.
That's actually not true either. Because no, that's not true. Because physicalists
that's what the scientists believe. I'm not saying
that's wrong. I'm telling you that's wrong. The thing that what are you saying? Oh my God, you're saying this is what the physicists believe. I say that's wrong, and then you say, but this is what the physicists believe. No, that's not right. First, there is controversy in physics whether or not there is physical reductionism, meaning that entities reduce, they bottom out at fundamental particles. Actually, most physicists are not committed to a view like that. So that's actually that construal of physical is one that gerrymanders a large population of what physicists either believe or are open to, where they're actually indifferent to whether there's reduction. Now, there's also a second thing. Physicists don't define physical. Philosophers of physics do. Now, I gave you three construal of how physics is defined by people
Could you
in this
define
field.
something physical, like just in a clear way, so I
Yeah,
can understand?
so I said it in clear ways. You just weren't. You're not
No,
tracking
I
that.
was,
So,
but you used like three analogies.
well, then what do you analogies?
Or
I
like
use
you
any
describe it in three
analogy.
different ways. Just describe it in like one simple way. What is something that's physical?
Well, yeah, you can have different senses, or sorry, you can have different ways of describing the same object or concept. But yeah, so one way you can define it is a physical thing is anything that in principle physics can describe. That's one construal. Another one is that physical just means that it's either something that is material or supervenes on the material.
Okay. The first one was very ambiguous. If something physical is anything that physics describes, well, that's very ambiguous. I'm not sure. That's just
Well,
like
it's whatever is posited by our current or future complete physics.
okay. Yeah. What was the third one? Earlier you had like a third way of describing something.
No, the third one was actually, like I said, it was the way Linford defines material, not physical.
Okay.
Where I said material is non-mental. It's a contrasted definition.
So material and physical, you have
Or
different
negative
definitions.
definition. Yeah, they're different.
Okay. All right.
Material
So-
just means non-physical. At least that's one way. Another one is just extended in space.
Or if it supervenes upon physical properties.
Okay. So just to make sure I understood you correctly, you don't know why a particular brain or a particular configuration of matter brings rise to this particular subject rather than a distinct one. So your answer is I don't know, basically.
No, I said there is in philosophy of mind mechanisms produced by physicalists, right? But those are actually extremely complicated. I can name you a couple. I don't actually remember off the top of my head. If you want, I can give you ones that are actually prominent in philosophy of mind, where physicalists have answered the question of what's the causal mechanism between that bridges the correlation causation gap. This isn't something new. Also, this like for the past 50 years, there have been actually multiple theories offering answers, but there actually hasn't been close to any for the dualist, unironically. So
okay.
it's strange, one, that you believe in a view that commits you to that a view that offers metaphysical baggage, which is obviously an explanatory vice, right? You want a more parsimonious view or more ontologically economical view. So you're already doing an issue and making more commitment. You're also making commitment to these things existing non-physically or non-materially, non-spatially extended. And then it just calls into question what it even means for something to exist under that concept. It seems you didn't have a definition. So now it just seems like you would have to engineer. You're not even clear what you mean by exist. Maybe you're a primitivist about existence. Maybe you just actually don't know what you mean by exist, where you're applying the predicate to objects. So in any case, your view is not actually offering anything good. First, you also can't answer the question as illustrated in the conversation. You have metaphysical baggage, so your view's inflated, right? And if we look at the prominent contemporary literature, I'm confident enough to say there's zero theories about how they bridge the gap in dualism. In fact, a lot of dualists are actually epiphenomenalists, but suppose there is at least a theory or two. It's extremely fringe, and that's just true in virtue of the fact I've read into philosophy of mind, and the theories that I've found were literally none. I've actually never been able to find one. But let's suppose that they're just not prevalent. There is prevalent theories in philosophy of mind. There's actually more than 3 ones that are extremely competitive, right? That they're actually seen as extremely plausible. In fact, serving most philosophers of mind, they're physicalists. Actually, almost all. Or actually, I don't remember. I'm not actually, let me walk that back. I don't want to speak from intuition. But at least it is true, empirically, that most philosophers of mind are physicalists.
Yeah. So with existence versus non-existence, because you said experience.
Wait, let's just grant you all the dualism stuff. How does this get to God?
I mean, if you're gonna say minds exist and they cannot be grounded in physical systems.
No, there's so many, both spiritualist and dualist people, like Michael Humer. He believes in spirits and he believes in souls, right? And he's an atheist. In fact, there's a lot of people who believe in woo-woo and metaphysically robust, non-physical or non-natural entities who are atheist. I mean, that's going to be a lot because almost all of atheism is atheist, right? I mean, almost all of academic philosophy is atheist. So when you see the diversity in theories of substance about the mind, of course, you're going to see it among atheists because theism is fringe, right? So yeah, I'm asking, so let's just suppose it's true. Suppose I'm a dualist atheist. Why would I think theism is true, though?
Well, suppose you're a dualist, you said? Like, you believe in the soul?
Suppose I think you offered a compelling argument to believe in dualism. Let's say now I'm a dualist. Why would I think theism is true?
Okay, so with like, so you're saying basically brains evolve, like there was, because it ties in back to life, right? The origin of life, because with the scientific materialist.
Sorry, continue.
paradigm, you can account for.
Scientific materialist paradigm. I'm not. Well, I don't even know what a scientific paradigm is. There's no such thing.
Okay.
And no, I'm saying I'm not a materialist. I just said I'm a dualist. Most atheists are not materialists. In fact, I don't know. Most, a lot of, at least, I think a lot. Well, they use naturalism. There's like fuzziness between what you would really distinguish between metaphysical naturalism and metaphysical physicalism. But no, not a lot of atheists are materialists. A lot do tend to be naturalist or metaphysical physicalists, right? But I'm saying suppose I'm a dualist, right? So let's stop talking about paradigms. Even if it were true statistically, most atheists are materialists. That doesn't matter. I'm saying I'm a non-materialist atheist. I'm a dualist. How are we getting to theism?
Well, why would there be like a soul in like a body with no
That's just
explanation?
burden shifting. That's just not an answer.
Oh,
Look, imagine.
if there's a non-physical
said-
mind, the best explanation is like how are you going to ground minds in physical stuff?
Wait, if the claim is well, first, why would I think they call for an explanation? Why not think they're burden?
So you're not going to explain it, basically. You're just
I'm
going
saying why not think they're unexplained?
Okay, you can take that route.
Because we don't have priors we don't observe souls such that we can observe whether they have an explanation. So if I'm committed to postulating non-physical entities that ground the mind, it's unclear why, even if it were true, that inductively I had good reason to think natural entities have a cause, right? So there's this law of causation where objects that are natural demand for, or at least I have good reason to think the next one I come across would be cause. I don't have that for natural things, supernatural things, or souls, right? So one, I don't see why I would think it's why I
It
would
would just
think
be
that.
like an inference, right? You would just like.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
use
What's
it.
the inference?
Well, the existence of non-physical minds is an inference that they could be grounded on like an absolute mind, or like a
What is an absolute mind is supposed to mean?
like if you can't ground minds on configurations of matter, then the
Well, to
minds
be
can
honest,
be grounded on minds
I don't
that
even
are not.
understand this concept, like, or at least one, I don't really make entire sense of grounding relations as used by metaphysicians, but also I doubt strongly that's what you have the concept that's used by academic
Do you believe in the necessary
metaphysician.
or necessary
Hold on,
existence?
hold on.
Yes, sir.
Well, you're probably meaning something like metaphysical necessity, and that's just gibberish in my view. I have no clue what that's communicating. So that would just be more things to explain what those mean. So let's just hold on. One is just now I forgot what I was even saying. Look, I don't understand why I would think that. Well, I was saying I don't understand what grounding means by the way even metaphysicians describe it. I sure don't think you mean it by the lights of metaphysicians or the way they cash it out. So I don't know what you even mean by grounding.
Yeah, I mean, if you believe, obviously, like you have to combine multiple arguments to get to God, right? So if
We're not
if
talking
you
about
believe in a
arguments right now.
necessary
I'm
existence,
talking about your argument uses language to levy an appreciation of them. I would first, in order to say the argument's false or sound, I would first have to understand what the argument's even communicating. And now I don't. So I'm asking you to explain the concepts of like grounding. What does grounding mean?
When I said grounding earlier, what I meant is just like this phenomena exists of non-physical minds, and we have to explain it, assuming that everything has an explanation. And like,
Why would I
that's what I
assume
mean
that?
by grounding. We just explain
Okay,
it.
well, I don't make that assumption that everything
don't
has an
think everything
explanation.
Oh,
No, I sure
well,
don't.
Well, why not? If you believe something has no explanation, then that's the same as believing in like magic, right?
No, I mean, do you think God's existence has an explanation?
Yeah, it's
Oh, so you believe in an infinite regress of explanations?
no, there could be.
Well,
like,
then that just means
well,
if
something
there's
could
not
be
an
like-
infinite regress, that means there exists a first entity, and if there's not a progenitor or an antecedent explanation, that's the only way you get a first member, right? Is to bankrupt it of having an explanation, right? And then if you're doing that, it seems you're being a hypocrite and saying that it's magic when you have that commitment. A classical theist wants to say that God is causally inert. He's not. There's nothing that explains God's existence. In fact, they would say God's explained in no way, right? And if you have a view like that, where even maybe you think God,
Then you could have things that are the explanation is within them. Do you agree with that? There could be
no, I don't.
Well, I could prove it. That
In fact, that's actually
I
just
can give you an
false.
example. I can give you an
No,
example of something that has the explanation for it is within it.
Wait, hold on. By within it, you don't mean the object is causing it or explaining itself, right? Because that's
No,
just not.
in a more
Because
abstract way. Like
No,
for-
because
for-
in philosophy of explanation, almost everyone agrees that, in fact, they define an explanation to be an irreflexive relation, such that it can't something cannot be the explanation for itself.
I'll just give you an example of something basically the explanation is within. Like
Thanks for the heart, Stoic.
So like, yeah. So basically, if like just like an experience, right? Say you put your hand on a stove. Like, how do you know if that's a negative experience? Well, the explanation as to why it's negative is within the nature of the experience itself. Like, So that explanation would
I
be
don't understand what that's even saying.
like the experience. Why? Like, how do you know if something is painful? Like, if you put your hand on a stove, you're not gonna look for an explanation outside of the experience itself. It's contained within as to why it's negative.
What is the thing being explained here?
Say you put your hand on a stove. How do you know if that's the negative?
I'm asking, what is the explanandum? What is the thing to be explained?
Okay, why is this a negative experience? Why? Like, how do you know? Okay, so what?
That's a question. That's not an explanandum. You're saying that you're explaining something. You're giving an example to highlight or intuition pump the concept of internal explanation.
No,
I'm not understanding what is the thing being explained.
Okay, I'll phrase it in this way. So, say I put my hand on a stove. How do I know that's a negative experience? The explanation as to why it's a negative experience is contained within the experience itself. So the explanation is contained
I'm still not understanding
what nature of the experience is negative. Like, so
but look, imagine
why is it negative? Because
imagine look, you're not understanding the issue. Imagine I described a causal mechanism and I didn't tell you what the relata are, right? You don't know the two things that I'm describing a physical relation between two physical objects and you don't know what the object, I'm not telling you what the objects are. How's that informative, right? I don't know what is the object of explanation, right? I'm asking for the explanandum, the thing that is being explained internally, right? What is the thing being explained?
We're looking for an explanation as to why this is a negative experience, why it's painful, why it's subjectively considered bad.
What explains the sensation you mean?
Yeah,
no, you agree that
the experience you agree that why isn't it positive?
Wait, hold on.
Why isn't it neutral?
Hold on.
What's the explanation as to why?
Hold on. You're saying that souls are informed, that they're observers, and that subjective experiences are objects external to them. So it's not an internal thing, right? You're not internally explaining.
The experience itself. I'm not talking about the observer of the experience. Just in an abstract. Just focus on the experience itself. Is it negative, positive, or neutral? How do we determine that? You're not going to look for an explanation outside of the experience itself. Something about the experience of putting your hand on a stove, the nature of the experience makes it negative. It's contained within the explanation as to why it's negative is within the experience itself.
That's just saying you don't have a reducible explanation. That the explanation.
Yeah, but there is an explanation. It's not that there's no explanation.
What is the explanation there?
The thing itself, it's within it. It's internal. That you're not.
I don't know what that means.
There's no explanation. Okay, like the experience of putting your hand on the stove, you're not going to say it has no explanation as to why it's negative. You're going to say the explanation is within it. It's not outside of it. It's not that it has
if I was a physicalist, I can. Well, if I was a physicalist, I can actually give informed reason evolutionarily. But okay. I'm not. Yeah, that the sensations informed by the neural computation evaluates this as a negative experience in virtue of evolutionary facts. But in any case, I'm not understanding that response at all. Right? You're saying it's just in virtue of it having the experience?
Yes, the experience itself is negative.
That's not an explanation at all.
Okay, so when you personally put your hand on a stove, would you say that's a neutral experience or negative or positive?
I would say it's a negative.
Yes. Okay, so is the explanation for that, for why it's negative, outside of the experience itself, or is it there is no explanation, or is it the experience? Well, the explanation is within. Which one of those three?
Well, I'm a physicalist, so it's going to be external. But by your lights, if I assuming I'm entertaining the wrong,
put physicalism to the side. Just focus on the experience itself.
Well, there's no way I can give an informed answer divorcing it from a theory of mind.
Okay. What's your answer as to why it's negative? Because you said it's negative. You didn't say.
If I was one who believed in souls like you, I would say there's no explanation.
Well, I personally would say the explanation is the experience itself. It's within it.
But look, it just seems you're just equivocating on explanation for me, because you're equivocating on what almost everyone in philosophy means by explanation. Because what is meant by explanation is something that's definitionally, it's analytically true. It has the property, the relational property or the accessibility relation of irreflexivity, which just means objects cannot explain themselves. So you would agree, at least by the concept of explanation I'm working with, that it doesn't have an explanation, right? Because it's not true. It could be the explanation of itself, right? And under that control, that just means it lacks an explanation.
Well, why can't it be the explanation of itself? Why is it impossible for something to explain itself? Is there?
It's logically impossible, right? Just the meaning of the words.
Impossible.
Because it's irreflexive. If it's irreflexive, then it can't be the explanation of itself. It's irreflexive.
Why assume that's the standard?
Assume that. Well, there's a statistical fact that's the most. And if you're asking why, I don't even know what that means. Semantics aren't propositions, so they can't be assumed. That's like saying I define a bachelor as an unmarried man. Why assume a bachelor is an unmarried man? It's not an assumption. I'm the author of the words, and as I use them, that's what I mean. That's the concepts captured by the phrases, right? Now, there might be a statistical fact, like almost everyone uses the word bachelor to also mean unmarried man, right? But I don't understand what's the reason to. It's not a proposition that you have reason, right? like an epistemic reason. That doesn't make any sense. It's just I define it that way. That's how
I'm,
most people
I'm
define
still
it.
confused as to how
Or
you're
else,
saying,
wait,
like,
under your view, why can't I just say, when you say what explains, in my view, why the minds are located in this place, why can't I just say it's explained by itself?
well, that's different.
How's it different?
Because like
This is why people.
nothing
This is
about
why
the
people
nature
in
of the mind
philosophy religion
makes
don't.
it so that it must exist in this particular location. Whereas with the example of putting your hand on a stove,
Wait, I didn't hear what you said.
okay,
Can you
nothing
repeat that?
about the nature of the mind makes it so that it must exist in a particular location. Whereas with the
And by the
whereas
nature, what does
the
that
stove
mean?
example,
Is that the definition?
basically, I'm saying things can have an internal explanation, and with
I
the
understand that,
example,
but I'm not under. Look, you're not following. You're saying things can have an internal explanation, meaning they're the explanation for themselves.
yes.
Then I asked, under your view of explanation, why is it illegitimate to say that the controversy about what explains the mind's location, why that is not just explained by the mind itself? Then you're saying, well, because it's not because it's not true that by its nature it could be the explanation for itself. But in the case of me having experiences, it's true by the nature of the experience that it computates to being positive or negative. And I'm not understanding the nature language. So I'm asking you to explicate the concept there of nature.
Okay, so there's no contradiction for minds to be in different locations. Whereas with the like putting your hand on the stove, there's a contradiction to say
No, you're
that
not.
it
Hold
could
on.
be positive.
I'm asking you to define nature.
Okay, define nature. Well, it's the essence, I would say, of a concept. When I say
And-
nature, I'm referring to the
And what do you mean by
of the thing.
essence?
Basically, if someone were to say what is what is a lemon, right? So you're gonna basically give arbitrary definitions. You're gonna say it has to have a particular shape and so on. But basically, the essence would be just the thing as a concept, just in an abstract way.
I don't
No.
understand. The nature is
Okay, what
something's
do you think
essence.
essence is? What do you define essence
I
as?
don't. Wait, that first, that doesn't that at first I don't use that language. Secondly, if I did, that wouldn't matter at all because I'm asking how you use the semantics. So it wouldn't matter how I define the word. That's just evading. And thirdly, or actually, I guess there's not a thirdly. That would just be a weaselly move away from not answering the question about what you mean by the words by asking me to offer an account as I use the words by my when I invoke them, which I'm not invoking language, so I'm not burdened to give an analysis of the semantics for words I'm not using. Right? You're uttering terms I don't understand what you mean by. So can we just get clear what you mean by essence?
I mean, it's very abstract. It's kind of hard to say what something's essence is, but just think of any concept, right?
Why would I
Like,
think the concept's meaningful?
The concept of essence, or do you?
Mhm.
I mean, I still don't have like a very robust definition of essence because it could refer to it could apply to many different concepts, and it's hard to say what it is without referring
if
to the
you
individual
can't-
concept itself. It
Well, look,
kinda has to-
imagine. Yeah, but what you
the
do is
concept
when
of
you
the
have.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you have non-established analyses for terms that are not mundane words, they're like these metaphysically loaded terms that are essential to leveraging this argument. Then you create an impasse by not having an informed answer as to what you mean by these words used to leverage the argument. And you can imagine an atheist saying that my evidence for if gloosh exists, then atheism is true, right? And I say it is true, gloosh exists, therefore atheism is true. You might reasonably question what is meant by gloosh as utilized in the argument. And if I said, it's really abstract, I don't have a deeper analysis of the concept, you're creating an impasse, and it doesn't seem like there's any reason for you. I would find it appropriate for you to question whether that word's even meaningful when saying things like, oh, well, gloosh is my evidence for atheism, or if gloosh exists, then atheism is true. Gloosh exists.
Yeah.
I don't know what gloosh means. So when you say that you're talking about grounding concepts, and grounding is some concept about the nature, about things, right? And I don't know what nature means, and nature means essence, and you're saying you don't have an analysis of that.
I can't explain what essence is without reference to a particular concept. I can't just give a definition of essence unless I invoke a concept that ties in. So just giving it.
Is there any other
itself is too
examples?
abstract.
Is there any other non-mental examples of irreflexive explanations you can offer?
What do you mean by irreflexive? Sorry, I don't understand.
That X is explaining itself.
Okay, so other than like the example of the stove, can I give another example that the
Just
explanation?
non-mental entirely. Just no mental explanation.
I mean, would you consider like 1 + 1 = the explanation is within. Like, would you? That's not like
No,
a subjective experience. That's you
no,
wouldn't
I
consider
wouldn't
that an
accept that.
explanation within, like
No, I
self-explanatory.
would not. Mm-mm.
How is that? How is that's very basic? Like 1 + 1 = 2. Like, how is the explanation outside of it? Like, it's basically to
It might
follow.
be true. Yeah, but it being a tautology has nothing to do. Well, first, one plus. Well, suppose there's some mathematical concept of tautology. The tautology is not telling you anything about whether it's explained or not, right? All I mean for something to be a tautology is within the framework, it's true of every valuation or model. But whether or not that's true, that doesn't mean it requires an explanation, right? But look, no, I can either have an account where things like 1 + 1 = 2 is true and there's no explanation, right? Or, that would actually, it's funny, I had a conversation earlier about this. That would actually be a type of relaxed realism. Or I can have a view in which I have like some type of formalist account where it's explained by what the symbols and operators mean within the framework, right?
Yeah.
That explains how the formula is true. And it's not in virtue of the formula itself. There's nothing to do with it. It could either be true in virtue of the meaning of the operation and the variables constitutive of the formula, right? And an appreciation of the framework. Or it could just be true and have no truth maker.
Yeah, I'm just kind of confused about you earlier saying that like conscious experiences don't exist, like the smell of a rose doesn't exist. I define like non-existence is the absence of all things, and like the smell of a rose, I wouldn't say it's the absence of all things. So therefore,
Well, that's just not true. Because
like
what
how could you say
look,
experiences don't exist?
look, then
That's very
look,
confusing to
your
me.
language faces a lot of issues that should be obvious. In philosophy, fictions are contrasted with ontic things, or fictional entities are contrasted with ontic entities, right? Where ontic means exist, where a fictional entity doesn't exist, but they're still facts, they still have predicates. An example is Goku from Dragon Ball, right? Goku is a fiction, and Goku is not nothing. Goku has the predicate of having black hair, he has the predicate of being able to go Super Saiyan, he has the predicate of being a martial artist, or
Yeah,
take
but he
any
doesn't
fiction.
exist concretely.
Superman,
He doesn't exist.
he
exist in a
doesn't.
concrete sense.
No, fictions
Whereas
are
the
defined as entities that don't exist. They're
yeah,
contrasted with ontic entities.
yeah, but the smell of a rose is something that is concrete. We can it's not the same as a fiction
No,
or
but
something that
you want to
abstract.
say
It's concrete. Like when you put your hand on a stove, it's a
no.
very
You're not.
concrete
You're not.
experience.
You're
It's
not tracking.
nothing, something.
Okay, but you're not tracking. You want to say to not exist means it's nothing, right?
Yeah,
But
absence
you
of all
can
things.
have. Yeah, but there's senses of the word where that's obviously not true. In the case of fiction, where fictions aren't nothing, they don't lack properties. They have properties, and we would still say they don't exist.
I mean, you
Right?
can
The
make an
color
argument
color
against
red
it
isn't
and
nothing. The color
Yeah.
red isn't nothing. When we say Superman has a red cape, right? Red is not nothing, right? The predicate of having a red cape isn't nothing. But Superman having that predicate, instantiating that predicate, he's still a fiction, which just means he doesn't exist.
So you're saying conscious experiences like the pain of a toothache, the smell of a rose, so on, they're the same as fiction, basically. They're similar.
No, I'm not saying that. You're not following again.
They don't
I'm
exist in the
saying
same way that fiction doesn't
no.
exist.
I'm saying there's a reduction on the type of semantics you're using, right? The type of semantics you have is problematic because it's unclear how you reconcile this. It's either one, fictions don't. There is no such thing as fictions because fictions aren't lacking all properties. So all fictions do exist under
I
your
would say
view.
fiction does exist in like not in a concrete way, just as
So what
ideas.
you're
I would say they do exist as ideas.
Oh, so that means you're a Mignonian, right? You're a Mignonian. You know
Yeah,
what that
but
is?
it's not
or-
nothing. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I think I know what.
Okay.
It's not nothing. Fiction does refer to something, which is ideas.
But
Like
the Mignonian's not doing anything substantial. You realize, right? There's not an issue of substance unless you're
Yeah.
something like maybe you have a view that's more robust, where you think modes of existence are something like I don't know, like you're like a lot ontological pluralist where there's like actually a division in existence where I think the traditional Mignonian wants to say modes of existence.
I mean, doesn't
are
your
just-
intuition tell you that like the smell of a rose exists? Just going
No,
based
it
on
says
your
the
intuition.
opposite.
Your intuition says it literally doesn't exist. Okay.
And intuitions aren't justifiers anyway.
I know
so
they're not justified, but there's I don't know. For me, it's very obvious.
I'm surprised you're not a phenomenological conservative with all the silly views you have. I would think that's just a pebble in the pie.
Yeah.
Do you know
so,
what PC is? Phenomenal conservatism or no?
no, I don't.
Okay, well, should look into it. I would bet you're extremely sympathetic once read into it. But yeah, I mean, doesn't seem your view as at all any better. It seems like at best you have terms that are primitive, or you just don't have a defined definition that you can inform me. Realistically, I think you're using metaphysical gibberish concepts. It seems you're kind of doing
I mean, you could say that,
You're,
but saying experiences don't exist, like putting your hand on a stove doesn't exist, similar to fiction.
that's not
I could
a
make the
substantial
argument that
difference
that's silly.
again,
I
because the
could make the
Meinonian.
same.
But I already said that's not a substantial thing, because as a Meinonian, if I were using your semantics, right, I'm not. There's not a substantial difference. It's not like you that I'm losing something, or that you have something advantageous, or that I have something advantageous that I'm losing. It's more like I'm nurtured with language in a way that is, I guess you can say, very Azonian. There's a philosopher called Jody Azonian, and he has a very strict, precise account of ontological language. But I'm fine with saying they exist in that way, in a non uh, ontologically committing Mignonian way, or Meinonian.
But they
I still
exist
don't see why.
regardless.
Yeah, let's say they exist in the way you want to say it.
Yeah,
The
they're
point
not
still
nothing.
stands. Well, to
If
exist,
something's
to
not
not
nothing,
exist.
then exists.
Well, look again. That's just that. Now that's just being very obviously, um, like almost dishonest, because it's clear that fictions are understood to be contrastive with concepts in folk language, right? The common folk use fiction to be defined as a concept contrasted to existence, and it's obvious that folk people don't say fictions are nothing, or that they lack properties, because that's saying something more robust, right?
Yeah.
What they mean is that they're not objects of the actual world, right? They're not saying that they're nothing. You can have fictions don't mean nothing. Nothing means absent of properties.
I mean,
Fictions
how do you,
aren't
how do
absent
you
of
know
properties,
that,
they don't
that the
exist.
actual world exists? I mean, you're just going based on your experiences. Like right now,
That's
you're seeing a phone, you're
Right,
hearing and so on.
that's a wait. That's just
Like,
a
you don't even-
definitional. Hold on, that's just
You're
analytically
denying
true.
your
The actual world.
experiences as they exist, but the only thing you have is experiences, conscious experiences, and you're denying them, and you're saying only the physical
again,
world exists.
You're again not following. All you're doing is you're defining exist a different way in which they exist. There's no substantial laws here. So I'm not. There's not like an issue I'm falling afoul of not using the Meinonian ontology. Right now, the other thing is just it's definitionally true that the actual world exists or is real.
You don't
The
have
actual
access
world
to it.
is just a synonym. What does that mean?
You don't have access to the real world. You just have conscious experiences from birth up until now. All you've had was like perpetual,
What's the
continuous
argument for
experiences.
that?
Well, just look at your, like, you're born and like you're like the only thing you have access to is conscious experiences. Like you holding the phone right now, you're just
No,
having
I'm not a
conscious
subjective
experiences.
idea. Well, if you're questioning something like some externalist view about epistemology, I don't know how you're getting that. That doesn't follow from anything I said. I could be a direct realist in philosophy of perception, where my experiences are just directly observing the external world, right? That
Why
my
aren't you a
perceptions are
solipsist
accurate.
by that kind of view on reality? How come you're not a solipsist?
I don't even understand that question. That's like saying, well, if you're like a causal finitist, you don't believe there's infinite causal events, why aren't you a solipsist? The views aren't
Well, you don't
related
have
at all.
access to other minds. You don't know
You're
if they
making
exist
it.
in the real
Well,
world.
where are you getting that?
How do you know they exist? Like, there's no way to measure if they're
No, that's just
other minds or detect.
Well, wait, hold on. That's actually ironically the opposite. You're a non-physicalist, so you can't measure them, you can't observe them, you can't see minds. If I was a physicalist, I would have good reason to believe that there's minds that are not me. If I believe that a non-reductive view that they supervene over neural computation systems like brains. So it seems like you're susceptible to that question, not me.
Okay, so you're saying when you see a brain, you have good reason based on your physicalist worldview to assume that there's a mind as well.
How do you know there's other minds?
I mean, I don't know, like as an absolute. It's just an inference.
How do you know at all? I'm not asking if how do you know for certainty, right? Because we're not talking about like an infallible sense of knowledge. I'm just saying, how are you justified in believing that it's true? There's other minds.
Well,
why think there's another soul other than yourself?
I mean, I don't know what the soul is, so I would have to like basically know.
You don't know what the soul is?
I mean, it's the observer. I know it, but I don't know like the details. So I mean, it's kind of similar to you. You don't know how the brain functions. You can't.
Wait,
make
the
sure
observer. That's just saying it's the personal identity.
I can only verify that I am like I exist.
But the observer is just saying there's the subject. But what is the subject?
There's subjective experience, like smell of a rose and so on, and there's the observer.
No, those are the experiences. Yeah,
the observer is distinct from
you're doing it. Yeah, you're doing it again. So it's true that there's an observer. There's an appraiser that is furnished with experiences. They have experiences, but there's a difference between the appraiser and the experiences they have. You're saying the observer is the appraiser. What is the appraiser? Because I define the appraiser as a psychological continuity, and that's informed by an analysis of
just
physical structures.
You could just say it's me. You could say
that's not informative.
Well, you could verify it from direct experience. You could say the observer is myself. The eye is a synonym with the personal identity. To say that
I am the
Why
observer.
define it as psychological continuity? Like that's a. I mean, just saying it's myself is a better definition than psychological
How's that?
continuity.
No, what you seem like you're doing is, imagine I was in a parking lot and I was walking with my friend and I met him at the mall and I was going to my car with my keys, right? And he says, which car in the lot is yours? And I say, the car in the lot that's mine is my car. That's what you seem like you're doing. You're not informing me
That's not
what
a good analogy.
defines
'Cause
your car.
My car is not the same as myself. You could have direct
You're
access.
saying yourself is me, the observer, and those are synonyms.
Yes, you are the observer of subjective experience. When you're hearing those words, you're not those words that you're hearing. You're the one that has access to them. You're the observer
Right.
of them.
That's not answering the question of what is an observer.
I don't know what the observer is. Like, I would say it's just something non-physical that we don't understand yet. It's like, I don't know what the soul is. But we could, you can know
So
it
how's that?
by virtue
So
of
I
you
wonder,
existing.
do you think this is a legitimate answer? Imagine inversely, you ask me, what is the observer? And I say, I don't know. I just know it's not non-physical. I know it's not spiritual or not supernatural. What if I gave you that answer? Would you take that to be legitimate?
I mean, how could you explain it with the reference? Don't you see that the observer is non-physical? It's kind of
Just answer the question. Would you understand that move to be legitimate given it's a parody reason, or that move to be legitimate given it's a parody reason, or it's a parody move? It's literally the inversive move you're doing.
So if I were to ask you what is the observer, you would just say it's not the soul.
Hold on. You're evading again. I'm asking you directly. Would you take the move I did, which was mirroring the move you did in principle? Would you accept me doing it as a licensed move on my behalf, where all I'm saying is the I or the observer is just non-spiritual? That's all. I don't know what it is. It's just I know it's non-spiritual or non-supernatural.
I mean, I didn't originally when you asked me. I said I don't know what it is. I just know that it's me because I am the observer.
Yeah, but you're saying that you just know it's
I'm not saying whether
non-physical.
it's physical or non-physical back then.
So you're walking that back.
I never said whether it's
You did.
something physical or
Literally,
not.
like 30 seconds ago, you said you defined. You said verbatim.
I'm not sure if I said that.
I don't know what you said. I don't know what the observer is. I just know it's non-physical. That's what you said verbatim.
Okay, I'm not sure. I don't remember saying that, whether I said that or not. But I would say I don't know what the observer is, but I just know it's myself. So that's basically what I'm saying. And like solipsism is like pretty much even under your worldview of physicalism, like you can't disprove solipsism even if you're a physicalist.
And by disprove, you just mean I can't be justified in thinking solipsism is false because
there's no good reason, like under physicalism.
I just don't see why I would think you can defend that claim.
So you're saying you're a physical.
You're probably in a burden shift and ask, well, how do you defend it, right? And you don't have an inference establishing if I'm a physicalist, then I cannot offer a good justification. I think solipsism is false. You don't actually have that argument, right?
Not right now.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not warranted in making that claim.
Yeah, sure. I mean, earlier you said, how do I know solipsism is false, right? You asked me that question.
Yeah, I asked you, how do you know if there's other souls? And you said you don't know.
Yeah, it's basically because I exist. I assume other souls exist. But it's just.
Oh, it's an assumption. Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, you're assuming the real world exists too. You're making many assumptions as well.
What do you mean? What does that even mean? That's just an analytic.
Yeah. Do you have to go or?
Sorry, I got a call.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not sure if you have to leave soon or.
No, I don't gotta leave soon.
Well, where do you live, by the way? Are you in USA?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. I'm in Canada right now.
So you're like the Muppets from South Park, I guess.
Yeah.
Don't worry, Ike is my favorite character. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can end it here. I mean,
sure.
It seems like you almost baited it as if like you're giving something when saying, well, you're susceptible to solipsism, but it seems like you're also like agnostic whether solipsism is true. So I don't understand what was like the point really in saying that, but I don't know. Your view just seems to require philosophical tools that I think reasonably are gibberish. And if not, you just don't have an analysis. So it wouldn't be a productive conversation going into a conversation about philosophy of mind using tools that you can't explain to your interlocutor what they mean. So they would never appreciate
Yeah.
your
Would you
concept.
agree with the example that something can have an internal explanation, just taking
No, I
into
don't.
account? Okay, so like just the example, just ignoring whether minds are physical or non-physical, just focus on the experience itself
No,
of
yeah,
like
this doesn't have anything to do
putting your
with my
hand on
view
the
and
stove.
philosophy of mind. I would just deny that there could be internal explanations in the way you describe.
So you would basically say it's neutral, it's not positive or negative, putting your hand on the stove, or
No, I'm saying you have the
it doesn't have
all
an
the
internal
experience.
explanation.
Yeah, things can't be the explanation for themselves. You can't say X is true in virtue of X, because the question is what explains X, right? And in that way, you can sufficiently explain anything by just saying it's the explanation of itself. Imagine an atheist arguing with a theist and saying, "But the argument God doesn't exist is the fact that
I'm not
the
saying
universe
everything
explains
explains
itself."
itself. Just some things do, like
I
the
know, but I'm
feeling of
saying
pain is negative by virtue
I don't
of the
understand this
experience itself.
concept.
Like
Okay, well, I don't understand the concept.
yeah, I'm not saying like everything explains itself. Some things in reality explain themselves. For example, like the pain of a toothache, that is a negative experience, and the explanation why is contained within the experience itself. Something about the nature of the experience
Well, I
makes
don't
it
know. Nature
negative.
means either. That's like one of the
Okay,
tools that the metaphysical tools I
explanation
don't
is
understand.
the explanation of why it's negative is within. It's not external to the pain of it, like the toothache. Just focusing on the experience itself. So, like you could say some things have internal explanations, like with this particular example.
Yeah,
And
maybe
like,
if I understood what you were saying, maybe I could either
how do you not
agree or
understand
disagree.
this?
But
Like, is the experience of the pain of a toothache negative for you?
it just seems you're talking about a different concept I don't have, right? And I don't think is meaningful because it's just definitionally true. What an explanation is irreflexive, where it just means something can
Why
explain
assume that?
itself.
Why assume it
Again,
can't explain itself?
I already explained that definitions aren't propositions; they're not assumed. Right?
Okay, but what if I say
Imagine I defined a bachelor as like cheese, and someone else defined it as an unmarried man. You ask, why assume a bachelor is an unmarried man? It's not an assumption. The word bachelor captures the concept,
I guess
the
we would
joint
have to add
concepts,
new words.
unmarried and man.
All right.
That's just what that means.
All right. I have to go, man. Have a great day. Nice talk. See you later.
All right, sure. Have a good one. Cheers.
Bye.